Long before words like love or grief were ever spoken, there was a moment when the first human heart broke, a silent farewell echoing across the ancient world. It was not written in stone, nor sung in myth, yet it marked the birth of something profoundly human, the awareness of loss. Somewhere in a prehistoric cave, under a fading firelight, a small group gathered around their fallen kin, not just to dispose of a body, but to say goodbye for the very first time. That moment, raw and wordless, was when emotion became history and humanity began to understand what it means to love and to lose. To imagine the dawn of emotional consciousness in early humans, we must return to a time when the world was untamed, when survival was the only rhythm life knew. The air was colder, the nights longer, and every breath carried the weight of instinct rather than introspection. Yet in that quiet space between hunger and fear, something began to awaken, something no creature before had ever felt. It wasn't born of logic or necessity. It was the faint flicker of awareness, a fragile pulse in the darkness of the mind, whispering that existence was not only about living, but about feeling. At first, emotion was not distinct from survival. The warmth of the group by the fire wasn't yet called affection, it was simply safety. The loss of a companion wasn't yet called grief, it was disruption, confusion, an emptiness that didn't make sense. But slowly, over countless generations, these inner movements began to deepen. When one member of a tribe failed to rise at dawn, when their body no longer responded to touch, the others paused. Not out of practicality, but out of something they could not name. The eyes lingered, the breath slowed, and for the first time, they hesitated. In that hesitation, humanity was born. That hesitation, the momentary suspension between life and death, carried immense significance. It revealed that early humans were beginning to perceive continuity, to understand that what once was could cease to be. This recognition, subtle yet profound, is the seed of emotion. The capacity to recognize absence means one has already known presence. The pain of loss means the mind has learned to attach, to care. It was through this recognition that the first emotional consciousness emerged, setting humans apart from all other living beings. Neuroscientists and anthropologists today can only trace fragments of this transformation. In the shape of ancient skulls, in the structure of the brain's limbic system, in the faint echoes of ritual behaviors preserved in the archaeological record. But beyond the evidence lies something even deeper, the dawning of empathy. When one member of a group lingered beside a lifeless companion, refusing to leave them behind to predators or decay, it was no longer just instinct. It was the awakening of feeling for another. That act, however simple, was revolutionary. We often think of intelligence as what separates us from the rest of the animal world, but perhaps it was emotion that truly did. Intelligence alone can build tools, but only emotion builds meaning. The first spark of compassion, the ache of watching another suffer, the urge to comfort, signaled a new dimension of being. It was no longer enough to exist, existence now carried emotional depth. When a mother cried out for her child, or when a partner sat in silence, beside the stillness of a loved one, they were not reacting purely to biology. They were participating in the first shared understanding of mortality and love. It's almost certain that this emotional awakening was gradual, spread across generations and landscapes. It may have started with subtle gestures, staying near the dead, protecting their remains, or carrying personal objects as tokens of remembrance. Over time, these acts would evolve into ritual. But before ritual, there was simply emotion, raw and unfiltered. A mother's refusal to abandon her child's body. A partner's long stare at a face that would never move again. These moments, though unrecorded, shaped the foundations of human consciousness. They created the emotional architecture from which all future cultures, beliefs, and stories would rise. To feel sorrow means to hold memory, and memory is the beginning of identity. Early humans began to carry the past with them, not as a practical guide for hunting or survival, but as an emotional imprint. They remembered not just what had happened, but who it had happened to. This was an extraordinary leap. In recognizing others as individuals with meaning, they began to perceive themselves in relation to others. The sense of I and you emerged from this very awareness. Grief, then, was not only about death, it was the first realization of connection. Imagine the campfire's glow flickering across ancient faces, smoke curling into a cold sky. The tribe gathers in silence, unsure what to do but united by an unspoken heaviness. Perhaps a child looks up and sees tears forming, not from pain or exhaustion, but from something else entirely. In that instant, the child learns that the heart can ache for reasons beyond hunger or fear. That lesson, passed down through generations, became the emotional language of humanity. The awakening of emotion also reshaped how early humans interacted with the world. They began to see life as something fragile, something to be cherished. Animals were no longer only prey. The stars above were no longer only lights in the sky. There was a sense, however primitive, that existence had meaning. This shift in perception created the foundation for art, for spirituality, for empathy. When emotion entered the human experience, everything changed. It was no longer a world of instinctual reactions, but one of felt experience, where joy, fear, and love began to coexist within the same fragile consciousness. Through this awakening, humans started to see themselves as part of something greater, something invisible yet deeply real, a shared inner world that connected every heart. It was this emotional consciousness that allowed the first human to truly look into another's eyes and recognize not just a body, but a soul. The first burial rituals were not born from religion or culture as we know them today. They were born from feeling, from the unbearable weight of absence that early humans could not yet explain. In the deep silence that followed death, something inside them stirred, a desire to do something, to mark the passing, to care for the one who was gone even when their body could no longer respond. It was not logic that drove them to cover their dead with earth or flowers or stones. It was love, raw, instinctive, and deeply human. Imagine a group of early humans standing around a lifeless form, their breaths visible in the cold air, their minds unable to name the strange mixture of sorrow and reverence they felt. The body before them was once warmth, movement, laughter, companionship. Now, it was still, and that stillness demanded response. Perhaps one among them reached out, brushing away dirt from the face, unwilling to see it vanish into the soil. Another may have brought food, or an object once cherished by the deceased. Not because they believed it would be used beyond life, but because the gesture felt right. That moment, simple and wordless, was the birth of ritual. These early acts of burial marked a profound turning point in human consciousness. For the first time, death was not treated as an ordinary event. It became sacred, something that demanded pause, care, and meaning. Covering the dead was more than protection from scavengers. It was a symbolic act, an attempt to preserve dignity, to shield the body of someone once loved. Each handful of soil placed over the deceased was a language of its own, a primitive form of saying you mattered. Archaeological discoveries support this deep emotional history. In places like Khafji in Israel and Shanidar cave in Iraq, skeletons dating back tens of thousands of years have been found deliberately buried with care, accompanied by tools, flowers, or pigments. One of the most haunting examples is the burial of a child covered in red ochre, the mineral pigment symbolizing blood and life. That act reveals something extraordinary. Early humans had begun to grasp the concept of symbolism. They could represent emotion through material, translating feeling into form. Red ochre was not mere decoration, it was the physical embodiment of love, of remembrance, of continuity beyond death. What began as small, instinctive gestures eventually grew into shared traditions within tribes and communities. Over time, burial became a collective experience, not just one person's sorrow, but the tribe's way of holding grief together. It unified them, allowing emotion to be expressed and shared. Around the body, silence became sacred, movement slowed. Every action carried intention. These were not yet ceremonies in the modern sense, but they carried all the elements of reverence, empathy, and meaning that would later define religious ritual. Through burial, early humans found a way to process what they could not understand. It became a bridge between the living and the dead, between the visible and the invisible. The act of placing a body in the ground was both a goodbye and a statement of belief. Belief that the person mattered enough to be remembered. Even if they did not yet have words for soul or spirit, they acted as if something continued beyond the body, as if love did not die with the flesh. In that belief, however undefined, lay the foundation of spiritual thought. The physical gestures of burial also revealed how deeply humans had begun to feel empathy. To bury another required time, energy, and emotional endurance, all costly in a world where survival demanded constant vigilance. Yet they did it anyway. They stayed with their dead, they cared for them, and they mourned. This willingness to invest energy in the dead shows a profound expansion of consciousness. Life was no longer a series of instinctive reactions, it was a web of emotional bonds that extended even into death. In those earliest burials, one can sense the origins of everything that later became human culture: art, language, religion, philosophy. When they placed flowers beside a body, they were not only expressing grief, they were creating beauty from sorrow. When they arranged stones around the grave, they were shaping order from chaos. When they painted the bones with red ochre, they were telling a story without words, a story of love, loss, and remembrance. These gestures turned emotion into expression, and expression into culture. For the living, these rituals also offered something essential: comfort. By burying the dead, they could face the unbearable with action. Ritual gave structure to their grief, allowing them to move through loss without being destroyed by it. The act of returning to a burial site, of recognizing a place where someone rested, may have been one of the first ways humans learned to live with memory. That sense of continuity, that the dead remained part of the living community, helped shape early ideas of ancestry, belonging, and time itself. Each burial site, no matter how ancient, tells the same silent truth, that emotion sought expression long before language was born. The careful placement of bodies, the adornments, the symbolic gestures, all of these speak to an inner world awakening, to the realization that love could outlast life. Even in the harshness of prehistoric existence, when survival hung by a thread, humans found the grace to honor those they lost. It was through these simple acts of care that humanity first looked beyond death and glimpsed the vast emotional landscape of its own heart. Grief was the first great teacher of what it meant to be human. When early humans began to feel the ache of loss, something profound took shape within them. The awareness that life was fragile, and that connection carried both beauty and pain. In those first moments of mourning, when one sat beside the stillness of a loved one and felt the unfillable absence, humanity discovered the depth of its own consciousness. Grief was not only the response to death, it was the recognition of love. To grieve meant to remember, to value, to refuse to let go completely. It transformed the raw instinct of attachment into the emotional architecture of meaning. Long before words like sorrow or memory existed, grief was already teaching humans about time and continuity. To miss someone is to feel the passage of time, to sense that the world moves forward while something precious remains behind. That awareness of before and after, of presence and absence, shaped the very structure of human thought. In the mourning heart, the mind learned to hold the past and the present together, creating the first inner dialogue between what was and what remains. This mental space, this tension between memory and reality, became the birthplace of reflection. Through grief, early humans learned empathy. Watching another suffer loss stirred something shared inside the group. An instinct not only to survive together but to feel together. When one cried, others began to gather close, perhaps offering touch or simple presence. Over time, these gestures became silent languages of comfort. This was the moment when emotion began to extend beyond the self, when the pain of another became one's own. It was through mourning that humans learned compassion, the ability to imagine the inner experience of another being. Grief also bound communities together. In the harshness of prehistoric life, where daily struggle could easily fragment the group, the act of mourning unified them. The death of one became the sorrow of all. Through shared tears or silence, they found belonging, a collective acknowledgement that life was more than individual survival. Around the fire, as they remembered those who had gone, they found warmth not only in the flames but in each other. These moments of shared vulnerability forged invisible bonds, stronger than any physical tie. The group became more than a collection of individuals, it became a family, linked by emotion and memory. Anthropologists have discovered ancient burial sites where multiple generations were laid to rest in the same area. This practice suggests more than convenience. It speaks of lineage, continuity, and connection. Grief had taught them to see the dead not as gone, but as part of an unbroken chain that stretched backward into time. They began to conceive of ancestry, of belonging to something larger than themselves. In honoring the dead, they were also defining the living, recognizing that their existence was shaped by those who came before. This sense of continuity gave rise to identity, to the idea that one's story was part of a greater human story. The emotional complexity of grief also gave rise to imagination. When someone died, the living could not help but wonder where they had gone. This question, born from love and loss, opened the door to spirituality. The inability to accept that the beloved had simply ceased to exist led to the birth of myth, of afterlife, of gods and spirits. Grief thus became the bridge between emotion and belief, between the tangible and the transcendent. It inspired humans to look beyond the visible world, to sense something unseen yet deeply real. In this way, grief shaped not only the heart but also the mind. It drove humans to create art as a way to express what words could not. The first cave paintings, handprints, and carvings may not only have been celebrations of life, but acts of remembrance. Each line etched into stone was a silent echo of longing, a way to preserve what time threatened to erase. Through grief, creativity emerged. Humans learned to transform pain into expression, to give form to feeling, and in doing so, to heal. What is striking about grief is that it contains both suffering and connection. To feel it deeply is to have loved deeply. This paradox, that the same force that breaks the heart also binds it to others, became central to the human experience. It is through grief that humans learned the depth of attachment, the cost of love, and the beauty hidden in impermanence. The realization that everything passes gave rise to tenderness, to gratitude, to the awareness that each moment is fleeting and precious. Over time, the expressions of grief became ritualized. People gathered to remember, to speak names, to perform gestures that reaffirmed continuity and belonging. Through these shared acts, emotion became culture. Songs, symbols, and ceremonies grew from the soil of loss, and with them came wisdom. The understanding that mourning is not the end of love, but its continuation in another form. The bond between the living and the dead became the first invisible thread in the human story, connecting hearts across time. In the stillness after a death, when the fire's last embers glowed and the tribe sat in silence, something remarkable was taking place. Within that quiet ache, within the shared sorrow that no one could explain, humans were shaping the foundation of meaning itself. Grief had turned the awareness of death into the celebration of connection, teaching humanity that to love, to lose, and to remember are all part of the same eternal act of being alive.